So, look up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's Captain Durag.
Yeah, every single time I hear that line,
Mm-hmm.
I just have to think and say, it really sounds like the setup to a punchline, right?
It does.
Like something you'd hear in a comedy writer's room at maybe 3 in the morning when everyone is just totally delirious.
Exactly. I mean, it feels entirely like a parody. If I just came up to you and said, hey, there's a superhero and his name is Captain Durag.
I'd assume you were talking about a sketch.
Right, like Key and Peele or maybe some really biting satire from the Boondocks. But I'm not.
No, you're not.
And I think that is the wildest part of what we're going to be digging into today. Because that line and the character attached to it are completely real. It's from a cartoon.
A Disney cartoon. And I think we really need to emphasize that context right out of the gate.
Right.
We are not talking about some edgy late-night adult animation here.
Yeah.
We are talking about a show called Hey AJ, which is aimed directly at children.
Yep. So for you listening today, we are doing a deep dive into a really fascinating critique. It's by a cultural commentator, Kaida, and he basically tears this character apart. But I do want to make our mission clear right off the bat here.
Yeah, let's set the stage.
We aren't just here to spend the whole time dunking on one bad cartoon character, although...
We're definitely going to do a little bit of that.
Oh, absolutely, because the specific details are just insane. But this is actually about a much larger issue.
It really is. The character of Captain Durag is just the hook. It's the tip of the iceberg that Kaida uses to launch this massive, broader critique of the whole modern media landscape.
He's tackling what he calls lazy representation.
Exactly. He's trying to parse out the difference between authentic storytelling and what is basically just an offensive caricature. And he really digs into this broken feedback loop between Hollywood executives and the diverse audiences they're supposedly trying to reach.
It's a really interesting look at what happens when giant corporate entities try to, quote-unquote, do diversity, but they don't actually understand the culture they're pulling from at all.
And Kaida's core argument is that instead of things getting better over time, representation is actually getting worse. He thinks it's becoming more stereotypical and more hollow.
And frankly, just more insulting.
Right. And what I find so compelling about his perspective is his tone throughout the source material.
Yeah, he's not just angry.
No, he isn't coming at this from a place of just hating cartoons or hating media. He's coming at it from a place of pure exhaustion.
Well, he's just tired of it.
Yeah, he sees things like Captain Durag, and he basically just asks, really, is this actually the best you could do?
So we definitely have a lot of ground to cover for you today. We're going to look at the visual disaster that is Captain Durag.
I cannot wait to get to the shoes.
Oh, the stumpy yards. We will get there. But we're also going to get into the really heavy conceptual stuff from the source. We need to unpack what Kaida calls the oppression. And we're going to look at the really controversial debate around race-swapping existing characters.
That whole blackwashing versus whitewashing debate is complex.
Very. We're going to look at how that breaks down the philosophy of identity itself. And as always, we're just here to lay out Kaida's arguments impartially. We're just reporting on the viewpoints in the source material so you can weigh them yourself.
Exactly. And we'll also look at the fallout of all, because Kaida argues quite forcefully that this kind of content isn't harmless.
It has a real cost.
A huge cost for the kids watching it and for the serious Black creatives who are trying to make real art in an industry that, at least according to Kaida, seemingly only wants to invest in gimmicks.
It's going to be quite a ride. Let's just start right at the beginning. I want you to try and visualize this character as we go. Let's call this segment 1 the case of Captain Durag, because the name is bad, but the visual design is, well...
A choice is a very polite way of putting it. Let's break down the visuals that Kaida points out.
Okay.
So the character is a superhero, standard premise, but his costume is composed entirely of these cultural signifiers that honestly seem pulled from like a 1990s stereotype handbook.
Let's go top to bottom. First, obviously the name implies it, but he wears a do-rag.
Right, but not just on his head.
No.
The do-rag actually is his cape. It's a massive do-rag tied around his neck. It just flows behind him in the wind.
Which is from a basic physics standpoint is pretty hilarious.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
But okay, we have a do-rag cape. That's the D-rag part. What about his power? Or how he fights crime?
Well, the source notes he fights crime with, quote, spikes.
Spikes.
Yes. But when you look closely at the design, and Kaida emphasizes this, these aren't just generic superhero spikes. They are specifically designed to look like a hair pick.
A hair pick,
Yeah.
Of course. Because I guess the logic is if you're a Black superhero, your main weapon simply has to be related to hair care.
That definitely seems to be the implication they were going for. And it keeps going. He's wearing sunglasses.
Okay, normal enough.
But the source material specifically highlights that in the show, these are referred to as, quote, hater block.
Hater blockers. Wow, I really haven't heard that phrase used unironically, what, maybe 2010?
Yeah, it severely dates the reference points of whoever was writing this script.
It really does.
And then we get to the footwear. And this is the detail that really seemed to just break Kaida's brain in his critique.
Oh, boy.
The character is wearing what the show describes as, quote, stumpy yards.
Okay, for anyone listening who might not be completely up to date on New York street slang, we really need to pause and explain this.
Please do.
So stumpy yards is a very highly specific way of referring to Timberland.
Exactly. Timberlands or Tims are a huge staple of New York fashion, especially in hip-hop culture. But calling them stumpy yards is deep-cut slang.
Right.
So you basically have a flying superhero wearing heavy construction work boots as a key part of his crime-fighting costume.
It makes no sense.
It'd be like designing a superhero from Texas and deciding he absolutely has to wear cowboy boots with giant spurs just to fight crime, but doing it with zero self-awareness.
It's the sheer specificity of the stereotypes that get it. It feels like someone just hopped on the internet, Googled black slang, and threw every single search result into a blender to make a character.
And we haven't even touched on where he lives yet. You know, Superman has Metropolis, Batman has Gotham.
And Captain Durag.
He cleans up the streets of Slime City.
Slime City. Now, I admit this one actually went a bit over my head initially, but Kaida points out the context of that word right.
Yeah, so the word slime is a term that gained a massive amount of popularity in recent years. It was largely popularized through the rapper Young Thug and his YSL Records label.
Young stoner life.
Exactly. And the term is often used to refer to friends or close associates, but specifically in the context of fellow gang members.
So by naming the fictional city Slime City, the writers are explicitly coding the superhero's entire environment as a place defined by gang terminology.
Yes. In a Disney show intended for young children.
That is just, the disconnect there is wild.
And we have to keep coming back to that specific context.
Yeah.
The way this character is introduced is in an episode of Hey AJ.
Right, the main show.
The premise of the scene is that the main character, AJ, really wants to watch the new Captain Durag movie sequel. But her mom tells her she has to clean her room first.
So in the actual universe of this show, Captain Durag is presented as the absolute pinnacle of pop culture. He's the blockbuster hero that all the kids look up to and admire.
Right. The show establishes that this specific caricature is the gold standard for heroism in their world.
Now, I do have to play devil's advocate here for just a second because I think it's important.
Sure.
This character didn't just manifest out of thin air. Someone wrote this script. An artist drew this design. Executives greenlit the whole thing.
Yep.
And the creator of this specific character is Camille Corbett, who is a Black comedian. And the source actually quotes her defense of the character design.
What?
She stated that her intent was that she, quote, wanted our culture to have a superhero of its own.
And honestly, that right there is the core tension of this whole debate, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
You have a Black creator explicitly stating that her primary intention was positive representation. She wanted to build something for the cult.
But Kaida is absolutely not buying this.
Not even a little bit. His reaction in the critique is incredibly visceral. He looks at that stated intent, the idea of wanting to give the culture a superhero, and then he looks at the actual final result.
Which he describes pretty bluntly.
Very bluntly. He calls the result a, quote, nigga with a do-rag, and he sees a massive insulting disconnect there.
Right.
He essentially questions how, out of all the infinite, boundless possibilities of human imagination, how was that the very first thought for a superhero?
It does imply a real lack of ambition when you think about it. I mean, if you are creating a superhero from scratch, they can be anything. They can manipulate gravity, they can be a super genius, they can travel through dimensions.
Anything at all.
But the defining foundational trait they went with is he wears Timbs and has a do-rag cape.
Kaida actually compares the whole thing to minstrelsy.
Wow, that's a heavy comparison.
It is, but he argues his point. He says that if you saw Captain Durag pop up on a sketch show, like in Living Color or South Park, you would probably laugh.
But because you'd understand the context?
You would know it's a joke. You would know the writers are actively mocking the absurdity of the stereotype.
But because it's Disney.
Right, because Disney is presenting it with complete sincerity as a genuine hero, it crosses the line into being completely tone deaf.
The sincerity really is what makes it so uncomfortable. It feels kind of like when a massive corporate brand account tries to use internet meme language on social media.
Yes, exactly.
It's very, how do you do fellow kids, but weaponized with racial stereotypes.
And Kaida speculates about the boardroom dynamics where this actually got approved. He pictures these studio executives sitting around a big table looking at this sketch of a guy with a durag cape and just nodding along.
Thinking, yes, we nailed it. This is exactly what the urban youth resonate.
That is exactly the terrifying thought Kaida highlights. The idea that there are people wielding massive cultural power who look at Captain Durag and genuinely believe it represents black culture.
Which perfectly transitions us to the bigger picture here. Because if Captain Durag was just one isolated weird mistake, we could probably just laugh it off and move on.
But he doesn't think it's isolated at all.
No. Kaida argues this is symptomatic of a much larger, lazy approach to representation that is basically infecting the entire entertainment. So let's move into segment 2, the lazy.
This is where the critique gets very systemic. Kaida argues that Hollywood executives are basically operating under a collective delusion right now.
How so?
They seem to fundamentally believe that for any piece of content to be considered authentically black, it has to fit into a very rigid, very narrow box.
He actually uses the phrase, quote, nigga shit to describe exactly what he thinks these executives are looking for.
It's a harsh phrase, but he's making a very specific point about the corporate fetishization of the hood aesthetic.
Right.
He's arguing that the executive mindset is that if a story isn't gritty, or if it isn't set in the streets or steeped in urban slang, then it somehow doesn't count as black story.
It's this reductive idea that blackness only equals struggle or poverty.
Exactly. And he directly contrasts this obsession with what he calls the oppressional.
Now, that is a term that pops up fairly often in cultural criticism, but Kaida really hammers it home in his argument.
He does.
He argues that the media focuses incredibly disproportionately on trauma. We're talking movies about slavery movies, about the civil rights movement where people are getting hosed down in the streets.
Movies about drug addiction and gang violence.
I feel like we see this cycle repeat every single awards. The diverse movies that get the big nominations and the critical acclaim are almost universally about...
That is exactly Kaida's point. And he is basically shouting into the void, asking, where are all the other stories?
The normal story.
Right. He is heavily advocating for what you might call incidental representation.
What does he mean by that?
He wants original stories where the main characters just happen to be black, but the actual plot of the movie isn't strictly about their race or their historical oppression.
He actually lists out several specific genres that he feels are just crying out for this kind of treatment. He mentions space operas, western, classic love stories.
He even specifically mentions wanting to see a story about a guy just trying to climb the corporate ladder.
Just a standard corporate drama.
Yeah, imagine a hit show like Succession or Mad Men, but with a predominantly black cast.
Yeah.
The story has absolutely nothing to do with systemic racism. It's purely about corporate backstabbing, ambition.
Honestly, that sounds like an amazing show. I would watch that right now.
I think a lot of people would. And Kai's overarching point is that those core human stories are universal.
A war movie is a war movie.
A romance is a romance. You really don't need to alienate huge chunks of the audience by turning every single diverse story into a heavy historical lecture on race relations.
But instead of putting resources into original characters in these universal genres, Kaida points out that we're mostly just getting what he calls hand-me-down.
The race-swapping debate.
Yes, let's really get into his beef with race swapping, because this is an incredibly hot-button issue in pop culture right now.
It is, and he completely leans into it. He refers to these casting choices as lazy race swaps or mantle swaps.
And he brings receipts. He cites several specific examples from recent media.
Right. He mentions a project where a black woman was cast as Joan of Arc,
which he sarcastically refers to as Joan.
He mentions Sam Wilson taking over the mantle of Captain America from Steve Rogers. He mentions Ironheart taking over the Iron Man slot in the Marvel Universe. And he also references the recent live-action remake of The Little Mermaid.
Now, to be fair, the standard industry defense for all of these casting choices is almost always the phrase, represent matters.
Right.
The argument is that young, diverse kids need to see themselves reflected in these massive, iconic, mythological roles.
But Kaida argues the exact opposite. He thinks this approach is fundamentally insulting to the audience.
Walk us through his logic on why it...
He views it as a corporate shortcut. He calls them hand-me-down because he feels it implies that black people simply aren't worthy of getting their own original pop culture icon.
That's a strong critique.
It is. He says instead of a studio doing the hard creative work to build a brand new character from scratch, giving them their own unique lore, their own history, and building a new fan base, the industry just takes a pre-existing white character, paints them black, and essentially demands a round of applause for their bravery.
It's almost like the industry is quietly admitting we don't actually believe an original black character can sell tickets on a global scale, so we're just going to safely slot you into this established property.
Precise. He views it as a massive signal of a lack of confidence in black storytelling. And this leads into a really complex philosophical debate that he highlights involving a specific Twitter thread.
Oh yes, the interaction with the user named UnderdogBTBL. This part of the source was really fascinating too.
It really breaks down the underlying logic people use.
Break this down for the the listener because it perfectly exposes a major double standard in how people talk about this online.
Okay, so this user underdog, BTBLM, was on Twitter arguing strongly in favor of race swapping.
Okay.
Their foundational logic was that whitewash, which is taking a historically or canonically black character and casting a white actor, is morally wrong because it actively erases that character's core ethnicity. But they argued that blackwashing, taking a white character and casting a black actor, is totally acceptable.
And what was the specific reasoning they gave for why it's acceptable one way but not?
The reasoning provided was that white characters are treated as the default in society, so their whiteness isn't actually central to their identity. Therefore, you can change their race without losing anything fundamental to the character. But black characters, the argument goes, are fundamentally defined by their black. So if you remove that aspect, you essentially destroy the entire character.
I have definitely heard variations of that argument online before. It's this underlying idea that minority characters are inherently political or deeply cultural in a way that majority characters.
Right. It treats whiteness as a blank slate and everything else as a specific condition. But Kaida takes this argument and completely flips it on its head.
He argues that this specific mindset is actually incredibly demeaning to black.
He really does.
How does he frame that rebuttal?
He asks you to think deeply about what you are actually admitting if you agree with that logic.
Yeah.
You were essentially saying that a black character's entire value, their whole reason for existing, is just their skin color.
Wow.
You are arguing that if you take away the race of a black character, there's literally no personality, no history, and no human depth remaining.
Yeah, when you spell it out like that, it suggests that black characters are completely one-dimensional.
Exactly. Whereas under that same logic, white characters are allowed to be these complex, fully realized humans whose race is just an incidental detail of their larger existence.
So Kaida is demanding that black characters be afforded that exact same level of humanity and nuance.
Yes, he is saying we are a lot more than just our race. If a studio can swap a white character because they are a universal human, why can't the industry create original black characters who are also treated as universal humans?
That is a really profound reframing of the whole issue. It moves the entire argument away from a simple question of fairness and makes it a demand for actual depth. He's asking for depth.
He wants characters that can stand firmly on their own 2 feet, not characters that are just wearing someone else's recycled costume.
Which perfectly brings us right back to the very specific costume that started this whole deep dive, Captain Durag.
The durag cape.
Because in segment 3, we really have to talk about the real-world fallout of all. Kaida argues that characters like this aren't just annoying or poorly drawn, they are actually dangerous.
He says they open the floodgates.
Let's talk about the flood. This is the real be careful what you wish for part of his critique.
Right. Kaida argues that when a massive, trusted entity like Disney validates a blatant stereotype like Captain Durag, they are essentially giving the entire internet a free pass to mock black culture.
It's the normalization of. If Disney officially says a real superhero can wear a durag cape and, quote, hater blocker, then logically what is stopping internet trolls from taking that exact same concept and pushing it even further?
Nothing at all. And Kaida proves his point by listing out a whole series of satirical superhero names in his critique.
These are names he either came up with to prove a point or names he fully expects to see generated by just to show how incredibly easy it is to slide from a character like Captain Durag into straight-up overt race. The list he provides is honestly brutal. I'm going to read a few of them, but for the listener, be warned, these are meant to be harsh characters.
They are very jarring to hear.
He mentions names like Wick Thick EBT Girl, Miss Aborts, the Weave Warrior.
It's incredibly uncomfortable to even say them out loud.
It is. The list continues with the Kent, Section 8 Soldier, Professor Fade, the Sidekick, Oxtail Warrior, and perhaps the most absurd black and...
They're deeply offensive, absolutely. But Kaida's underlying point is structurally, is Captain Durag really that functionally different from a joke name like Professor Fade?
Not really.
They're both playing in the exact same shallow sandbox of cultural stereotypes. The only actual difference is that Disney decided to put their corporate stamp of approval on one of them.
He's making the case that by officializing the caricature, Disney has drastically lowered the bar. They've made it socially acceptable to reduce black to a collection of excess.
And he also makes a very pointed note about the timing of all this. The episode of Hey AJ featuring Captain Durag dropped right in the middle of Black History Month.
I mean, you really cannot make that kind of corporate irony up.
You truly can't. But moving beyond the abstract idea of internet trolls, Kaida gets very personal about the real-world impact on actual children. He brings up his own child in the critique.
That part of the source really hit me hard. He explicitly states that he does not want his child watching content that suggests, quote, all I am is just stereo.
It's the very real fear of internalization.
Right.
If a young, impressionable black child is watching Hey AJ and they see that the coolest, most aspirational hero in that world is basically just a walking collection of street slang and fashion trope, they might start to internalize that.
They might subconsciously start to think that's all they're allowed to be. Like, oh, to be recognized as a hero or to be cool, I have to act exact.
It actively limits a child's imagination. It essentially tells them that their rich culture is just a Halloween costume you put on.
Exactly. And the source actually contrasts this cartoon with another piece of media to show how this performative diversity works across different. He brings up a show called Hot.
Right, this was a project coming from Megan Thee Stallion and produced by a former producer of the Boondocks.
So Kaida looks at a promotional screenshot from this new show, Hotties, and what does he see in the background?
He sees classic imagery of resistance. He points out black power fists and Pan-African flags decorating the background of the set.
The profound visual language of civil rights and revolution.
But then he actually looks at the premise and the content of the show itself.
And what does his predict show?
He bluntly predicts it will just be 10 episodes of twerking drug use and pushing a generic white people bad narrative.
He sees a complete hypocritical disconnect between the noble imagery of black pride on the walls and the actual content happening in front of it, which he views as culturally degrading.
It's basically using the historical Pan-African flag as trendy wallpaper for a show that is just reinforcing the exact same tired negative stereotypes.
And he predicts the show will just get canceled quickly because audiences eventually through that lacks up. It's all flash, it's all aesthetic over actual narrative substance.
Yeah, I really don't want to paint Kaida as just this grumpy cynic who hates all modern media.
No,
Definitely not. Because in segment 4 of our deep dive here, we see that he actually spends a significant amount of time in his critique talking about the media he absolutely loves. He talks about what he considers the golden age of representation.
This is a crucial pivot in his argument. If he just hated everything, you could easily just dismiss him as a hater or a troll himself, but he has a very clear, established vision of what good representation acts like.
Right. He points back to television from the 70s, the 80s, and the early 2000s.
He lists out these foundational classic shows: The Jeffersons, Sanford and Son, Good Time, The Cosby Show.
And if you really think about the core premises of those shows, it proves this point. The Jeffersons was fundamentally about a highly successful business owner navigating wealth.
The Cosby Show, regardless of the extremely complicated legacy of its creator today, was fundamentally about a doctor and a lawyer raising a family.
Even a show like Good Times, which was explicitly set in a poor family living in the public housing projects, focused heavily on the strength of the nuclear. It focused on their enduring love for each other despite their circumstances.
That is the key differentiator for him. Kaida points out that these classic shows featured strong family units and universal life. The characters happened to be black, but the weekly stories were about normal family dynamics, teenagers growing up, career ambition.
They weren't just weekly lectures about the struggles of being black.
He even defends the blaxploitation era of film, which often gets a lot of criticism.
He does. He argues that even though that era was notoriously gritty and full of stereotypes, movies like Shaft or Superfly actually had incredibly compelling lead characters and propulsive plots.
The movies weren't just looking down on their own characters in pity.
Exactly. And then, since we started this whole discussion with superhero, he provides his personal list of heroes that he feels were done right.
It's a great list. He names Blade, Storm from the X-Men, Luke Cage, Bishop, Black Lightning.
He is also very specific about how he names Static. He makes a point to say the hero's name is Static, not Static Shock.
Right, because Static Shock was just the title of the animated cartoon, but the actual hero's name in the comics is Static. He wants to show proper respect for the character's real identity.
But the one character he really spends time focusing on is Jon Stewart the Green Lantern.
Oh, absolutely. For an entire generation of kids who grew up watching the Justice League Unlimited animated series, Jon Stewart simply is the definitive Green Lantern.
And Kaida breaks down exactly why he loves that character so much. It's because Jon Stewart was an architect. He was a former Marine. He had a real job. He had immense personal discipline.
He was a fully realized adult man who just happened to possess cosmic power ring.
He wasn't flying around wearing a do-rag cape. He wore a standard core uniform.
Consummate professional.
Exactly. He represented high competence. And Kaida argues forcefully that modern media has completely lost the ability to write characters like that. He says that today, if you stop a random person on the street and ask them to name a good, modern black superhero, they can really only name one.
Black Panther.
Right.
That is a genuinely scary thought for the health of pop culture. We went from having this wide, diverse array of different types of heroes in the early 2000s to basically just relying on one single major franchise to carry the entire weight of
And he uses a really funny hyperbolic example to illustrate where he feels this current trend is inevitably heading. He jokes about a future movie where a character named Professor Chains is destroying the city.
Professor Chains. It's a funny visual, but it reflects a very real, deep-seated fear that the industry is actively devolving backward into pure caricature. So we've thoroughly diagnosed the problem according to Kaida. We've looked at the historical context. Now let's move to segment 5. So what of it all? Why does any of this actually matter to the broader entertainment?
Because Kaida firmly believes this trend is actually killing the business model of Hollywood.
He argues that this isn't just a matter of bad art, it's fundamentally bad business. He talks a lot about audience alienation.
We hear a lot of industry chatter these days about superhero fatigue or franchise fatigue, right?
Yeah, all the time.
But Kaida frames it differently. He thinks what audiences are actually experiencing is lecture fatigue.
Lecture fatigue. That makes
He argues that massive audiences are abandoning streaming services and tuning out of theatrical release because they are just tired of being pushed around. They are tired of being pandered to with this lazy surface-level representation, and they are tired of being constantly lectured by the media they consume to relax.
But the studio executives don't seem to see it that way at all, do they?
No, they don't. And this is what Kaida describes as a toxic, self-fulfilling prophecy.
How does that cycle work?
Well, when a deeply flawed show like AAJ gets massive internet backlash, or when a lazily race-swapped blockbuster movie completely flops at the global box office, what is the standard executive response? Do they ever look inward and say, maybe our script was just terrible, or maybe our costume design was wildly offensive and lazy?
Never. They almost universally pivot to saying the fans are just toxic.
Exactly. They blame the paying audience.
Yeah.
They release statements saying, oh, people just inherently don't like diversity. They use the very real existence of racism as a convenient corporate shield to deflect totally valid criticisms about the poor quality of their art.
And because they constantly blame the audience, they never actually fix the root problem. They never hire better writers. They never develop original IP. They just keep churning out the exact same lazy content and somehow expecting a different financial result.
And the people who ultimately lose out the most in this entire scenario are the serious Black creatives working in the industry.
Kaida specifically name-drops some major heavyweights to make. He mentions directors and actors like Ryan Coogler, Michael B. Jordan, Aldous Hodge, and Idris Elba.
These are highly talented people who are trying to make actual cinema. They are trying to tell sweeping, universal, powerful human stories. But Kaida argues that this constant flood of lazy content, the Captain D-Rags of the world, completely poisons the cultural well.
It makes it so much harder for the truly great original stuff to ever get greenlit or funded.
Right, because if studio executives start to falsely believe that Black content only means street stereotypes and heavy-handed preachiness, they're going to be extremely hesitant to greenlight a nuanced, subtle drama pitched by a great director.
And on the flip side, if audiences have been burned 5 times in a row by bads, they might just decide to stay home. Show up, the actual good original movie finally comes out.
It creates a permanent stigma around diverse projects. It actively lowers the perceived value of the brand in the eyes of the consumer.
Which is just a massive tragedy for everyone involved. It hurts the audiences who genuinely want good, entertaining stories, and it hurts the brilliant creatives who just want to make lasting art.
So when you look at the whole picture, it really all connects perfectly. The absurd design of Captain D-Rag is just the most visible symptom. The underlying disease is a total lack of corporate imagination and a fundamental lack of respect for the intelligence.
We have definitely covered a massive amount of ground today. We started this deep dive looking at a cartoon superhero whose primary accessory, durag cape, and we ended up completely dissecting the economic and creative failures of the modern Hollywood studio system.
It's a fascinating progression.
So as we wrap up here, what is the ultimate takeaway? What is the actual solution to this mess according to the source?
I think the clearest expert synthesis here revolves around the concept of humanity. True lasting representation isn't about arbitrarily checking demographic boxes on a clip.
Or adding stereotypical cultural accessories like hater blocker character.
Exactly. It's about viewing and writing characters as complex, fully realized humans first and foremost.
It's about the industry finally realizing that a Black character can just be a normal guy trying to get a promotion at a bank, or a pilot trying to save the galaxy without constantly needing to carry the heavy sociological weight of Slime City on his shoulder.
And I really love the final provocative thought that Kaida leaves his audience with at the end of his critique. It's a direct challenge to the entertainment industry itself.
What does he ask them?
He asks if the only thing currently stopping diverse creatives from succeeding is themselves, which is a point, he argues. Then why do they continually choose to return to the trauma of the oppression Olympic? Why not just choose to make something that is genuinely cool and unique?
Just make it cool. It sounds so incredible when you say it out loud.
It really should be that simple. Stop trying to awkwardly fix complex societal issues with lazy children's cartoons and just focus on telling a fundamentally good story.
And maybe, just maybe, leave the Timberland work boots at home the next time you sit down to design a superhero costume.
I think that is universally excellent advice for any artist.
Thank you all so much for joining us on this deep dive today. It's a very complex, often messy topic, but it is one we absolutely need to be talking about as media consumers. We will be back next time with another deep dive into the underlying cultural currents you need to know about.
See you all in.